Hey guys, welcome to another episode of no episode, it's just me. And today we're going to be replacing an axle shaft on a 2009 Volvo S60. This is a front-wheel drive. I think the same applies whether it's all-wheel drive or not. It's not really a horribly difficult task. I've done it before. I just got a cheap one, and it shows it's a year and a half in, and I've got an issue with it. First things first, let me show you a little bit about what you need to do to get prepared to do this job. As you can see from the shirt I was wearing, I have on an old Angry Bird shirt that I don't mind getting damaged or dirty. So wear something you don't mind getting dirty. Get both ends of the front of the car up off the ground. You don't want to try to do a job like this with one end off the ground. The reason being, these cars have a torque bar, anti-roll bar, sway bar, whatever you want to call it. It is a big bar right down here that when one side is up in the air and the other side is down, such as when you're going around a curve and your car tries to lean over, that bar twists and actually pushes the car flat again so that it doesn't roll or sway. That's why it's called an anti-roll or anti-sway bar. If you have one side jacked up and the other one not, that bar is twisted and is under a huge amount of pressure. This little linkage right here, your sway bar link that hooks up to your strut, you've got to remove this. So when you do that, that's going to pop down with such incredible force and speed, it could snap a body part off. So you don't want this thing under any stress. You want this up in the air. Make sure you use jacks and jack stands. You'll see I've got a jack and jack stand on both sides of the car on an appropriate location on the frame or lift point of the vehicle. Now, the issue I have, here's my half shaft. It starts out down here. My CV joint runs up to a coupler here that goes further over to the transmission of the engine. So there's a little joint here. You could probably hear it, whether I twist it or whatever. There's a lot of noise there. There shouldn't be. Let me show you what the replacement looks like. This, haven't used this brand before. It's a Cardone, and this, I can't show you from here, but trust me, there's no play or no noise or slop like that. That joint is designed to be very tight. And this is an inner joint. I think it's called a plunge joint, so that it has this cup assembly so that that roller set in there can go in and out as this part right here goes up and down like that. This end right here can move in or out a little bit, so it has to have like that plunge assembly. Mine was bad. I can hear it when I start it, and it puts tension on this. It tries to rotate all of a sudden when I have the brakes on. I can hear it go plunk. So it's bad. It needs to be replaced. I'm going to show you how to do it today. So now that I've got it up in the air, next thing I need to do is I need to get the skid plate out from under the bottom of the car. It's the same thing as when you change the oil. I'm not going to show you how to do that. I do have an oil change video on my channel here. Look that up for the S60 if you need to. But all we're going to be doing is getting up under here and removing that skid plate. So we'll be back in a few minutes. Okay, next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to remove the brake caliper here, which is just held in by a pin here and here that have these little caps that go over them like that. So you got to remove the caps. Just use your fingernail, get up under it, and you're going to need a T45 to go in there and remove those pins. The pins will come out, and then this caliper will come out, and I can get that out of the way. Whoops. Mega zoom there. Okay, well, let me get those loose and I'll be right back. I'm just doing this one-handed. Okay, I've got these loosened up. They're not supposed to be in there real tight anyway. They're not torqued down to some huge torque spec, so. Okay, that is loose. I can see the threads back behind there. Let's get this other one out. These are kind of interesting to get all the way out, but once you've got them loose, pull against them to wiggle them loose a little bit. And what I find is helpful is to take my Torx bit, turn by hand as I'm pulling out at the same time, and it kind of pulls this pin out at the same time. And I'll just take that pin and set it off to the side for right now. I can clean that up later. Oh, this one wasn't out all the way. It's trying to come out. So I'll get that out and I'll come back to you guys. Okay, got that out. I almost forgot, but I got to pop these pins out here. Those are real easy to remove. Just take a screwdriver, pop them off like that. Remember which way it goes on. It doesn't hurt to take pictures as you're doing stuff. If you've never done this before, take a lot of pictures, maybe even record yourself or something, so you know what the reverse order of putting all this stuff back on is. Now, I'm going to pull this off and hang it up here out of the way so that it's not in the way and it's not just hanging on this, because it can break that little piece there. Guys, if this wiggles a little bit here, I got my camera hanging on me. Now I'm going to take this sway bar link off here. I'm going to remove this top nut. That is a 3/4 inch is what I'm using, and this is a T40 that you go in the center, and you can turn this. And I actually think I'm going the wrong way. Am I? Yes, I'm going the wrong way. There we go. I'm looking at it from backwards. Oops. And I can remove this. I've seen people use air hammers on these too, or air wrenches, and I might use an impact just to break that thing loose, but I don't want to try to spin it off because this high speed spins the piece inside that back section there, and it's not good for it. So this will be a good opportunity when I get this out to make sure my sway bar link is in good shape, although that's not hard to verify right now, because when it's up in the air free hanging like this, you can actually wiggle it and you can feel whether these joints are tight or not, and that's tight. And ooh, that one's got some play down there. So I need to replace this one. Thankfully, I have a spare, so I'm going to go ahead and replace it. Replace this, no rattle on that now. It's a lot tighter. I move it, it holds itself in position. It's tight enough. That's what it should do. And that's hard to move too. Now, I want to get this out of the way, just so I make sure I don't damage anything. So, sorry for the lights there. Let me do something. I'm going to take and spritz just a tiny bit of WD-40 there on that rubber piece, so I can pull that out of the bracket. And if you look down in the hole there, here, let me get a light. I'm losing track of everything. Where's my light? There it is. Look right down in there. There's a single little nut that holds, or bolt that holds it in place. That is an 8mm, so I'm going to remove that real quick to get that out of the way so I don't pull this. This is for my anti-lock brake system, and I don't want to damage it. Okay, next thing I'm going to do, and I could have done this when I removed the brake caliper, is I'm going to get this piece right here out of the way. I'm pretty sure when I pull this off, this is going to stop it from moving, so I've got to remove those. And it's just got these two bolts here, 15mm. Again, this shouldn't be too tight, but I'm going to need two hands with it. So I'll get those off, set this off to the side, and then we'll come back. Okay, you notice this thing comes off as two pieces. I got the bolts back in there to hold it together, but those two pieces basically just clamp on either side of this right here. So when you bring them off, keep these oriented in the right order so that you know what goes where when you put it back in. Again, take lots of pictures, it will help. From here, I think the next thing I'm going to do is get this steering outer tie rod end removed right here. And if I get my flashlight, whatever I did with it again, I've got, see, that's a flat on two sides so that I can get a little wrench in there and grab it and keep it from spinning as I get that nut off. Again, you don't really want to use an air wrench on this, maybe just enough to break it loose, and then you take it out by hand. But don't crank on those. Be gentle with them so that you don't break them. So I'm going to get that started and we'll be right back. Okay, so I got this off and I put my nut back on there to hold on to it. Again, wiggle all of this, make sure you don't have any looseness or sounds. These are all new parts, so they're in good shape on this. The ball joint part on this is in good shape. So now I've got these two big strut bolts here. I'm going to start loosening those up and remove that, and then I'll take this axle nut off. Actually, I might get the axle nut off first, and then I'll take those out right there. Yeah, that is a 1/2 inch, so that should be pretty easy to get off too. That's where an impact wrench could come in really handy though. So let me see if I got a 1/2 inch impact and we'll get that thing taken off. And your new axle should come with a new one of these bolts. These bolts are under a lot of strain. These are torqued down pretty tight. You generally want to replace them when you replace the axle. So make sure yours came with one. If not, order one separately. They're only like $3, so it's not like it's gonna bankrupt you or anything, hopefully. Let's come right back when we get this off. Okay, so my bolt is out. Here's the bolt, and I said 1/2 inch, but this is actually 13mm. I keep forgetting that a lot of this stuff, most all of this stuff is going to be metric because this is a European car. Depending on what car you're replacing the axle on, it could be SAE or metric. So just make sure you fit the socket to it and it fits properly. So now we're going to take these two big suckers off, and I think one of them, these may be the same. I think they're like 21mm or something. So let me see if we can get these started. Okay, I got the nuts off and I got that upper bolt out. But before I remove this bottom bolt here, I'm going to get up under the car, because holding this drive shaft in, it's a long piece there. I'll show you the new one here real quick. There's this piece right here. This goes into the transmission. This is held in place by a little carrier bearing. And I've got to there's a cap that goes on that to hold it in place. I've got to go remove that cap. I think that is 15 millimeter nuts, so let's get up under there and see. All right, this is that carrier bearing I was telling you about that holds the axle on, and it goes into the transmission over here. Don't know if you can see it because of the darkness, but it's a long straight stretch there, so we've got to have something to keep that in from flopping. So you get that carrier bearing, and I was wrong, it's just 10 millimeter. So it's all we got to do is take that off, and we've got this cross member here it'll kind of drop onto to hold itself into place. So we're going to get that out real quick, and we're almost out. Be right back. Okay, at this stage you want to be careful with a lot of things. Get my flashlight over here. This boot right here you don't want damaged, so you have to kind of wiggle this out of the way to make sure it's not going to rip that boot. Then you can just lay the whole spindle back on the ball joint down there, kind of rotate it out of the way, and then there you've got your axle ready to come out. And if all works well, that's how easy it is to get out right there. So let me get you set up here on the tripod. As I turn it, you can hear that clicking. See how that moves in and out of that plunge joint? But you shouldn't hear that clicking. It's not horrible, but I want to get that replaced. So now we just put the other one back in reverse order. Let me get it out of the box first. Alright, next thing we want to do is lay the parts out and take a look at them and make sure that they match. See, this one does indeed come with a new axle bolt to hold it in place, so that's good. I've got my rings for my ABS sensor. Boots look like they are good. There, everything's held in place. No rattle whatsoever on that. Shaft on this one is a bit thicker than that one. You see this has got a taper, this doesn't. That doesn't matter. This bearing carrier right here, see that's a bearing, it actually spins, is all that matters. The cap goes over that, and these sections down here that go into the engine do match. You know what's always surprising to me is how little spline is actually used. That's only like 1.25 inches, 1.5 inches of spline that goes into that transmission that turns this shaft, that turns those tires, that can pull so hard, make that thing boil the tires, whatever. It is rather amazing. That's all the spline that gets engaged. Just that tiny little bit. But the way the splines are is they are a very strong design, so it's almost like a weld on 1.5 inches. So, you know, you really gotta do something to rip those splines off. That's a hardened steel. So let me get this thing up there and we'll try to shove it back into place. Another tip here on these, by the way, when you're carrying this, don't just grab this part and let this hang, or this part and let this hang. This cup assembly can actually slide too far out. You don't want to do that. You want to carry these things, you know, supporting both ends, and make sure you're not pulling this part out of this part. So be very careful about that, especially when you're putting it back in place. But just one thing I wanted to point out real quick. As my air compressor comes on. Alright, I got that carrier piece in and bolted in. So I've got to put this back through here, push that up, get these lined up, and I'm going to put the screws or bolts through here just to line it up and hold it in place. And then I'll put my axle nut back on here to pull this all in, and then I'll tighten all that down and start going backwards on my order that I pulled things apart. Alright, I got these back in and torqued down. One thing that can come in handy, remember this has rubber mounts there. You can push down on this. I just ripped my glove too. You can push down on this whole assembly to help slot this in, because it's probably going to try to raise up and set high. And then you can take a screwdriver in this hole here, push it through to kind of line it up, and then get one screw in, bolt in, and then you can get the other one in quite easily after that. But use a screwdriver to help line those up. It could be a big time saver. So now I've got this on, I've got to tighten it down, and then I'll put my sensor back in here, and then start mounting my brake caliper back on, and I am done. So that's all there is to it. Alrighty, and we are back. I had to take a break and go to a band competition my daughter was in. I had to push the piston in for the brake caliper to get it back on. It was just too tight to get over the pad here. You can get them off fine, but sometimes it just doesn't want to cooperate. That piston will shift and come out just ever so slightly, and then it's too tight to get in. Couldn't find my brake pad compression tool, so I had to go old school and get my big C-clamp out and put a piece of metal across the piston to push it back in. Just kneaded it in a little bit. Now, big tip, before I put these pins back in here to hold it in place, clean them and put a little bit of lube on these. The caliper slides on these pins as the brake pads wear. The brake pads will start thick, so the caliper will be out here, and as it wears, that caliper will actually start moving closer to your rotor, and it has to be able to slide easily on those pins. So make sure they are nice and clean and not scarred. If these do get damaged, buy new ones. They're only a couple of bucks to get these replaced. So and it can make a big difference in how your brakes function. And since that's 4,000 pounds worth of vehicle and rider, you want to make sure they work right. So I'm going to put a little bit of lube on these and then put them right back in up here and down there, and then put those rubber caps on to keep them covered. Let's get that done. Alright, got my caliper bolted back on. Do not forget to put the clip back in here. That will keep this from, you know, wobbling around a whole lot. I've got to put the air dam back on underneath. Double check that, make sure everything is all tight. I've got this tight down, those are tightened, this is tight, this is tight. All my brake pad and brake hardware is tight, so all I've got to do is put the air dam back on and put the tire back on, and we can check it out.